Arcade racing games are one of the coolest genre in gaming, so obviously the big publishers don't care about it. Back in my day, we used to get all sorts of arcade racers, like Need for Speed, Burnout, MotorStorm, Split Second, and even Blur. Remember Blur? The only Blur I recognize is my camera's autofocus freaking out. Hey, eyes up here, focus. The dystopian future of 2023 has turned the entire arcade racing genre into one massive blur, with Forza Horizon and Need for Speed desperately bearing the weight, all by their lonesome. And maybe LEGO 2K Drive? Forza usually steals all the racing game limelight, but I've always had a personal soft spot for Need for Speed. From hogging the Xbox controllers at my local church to play Hot Pursuit 2, yes, my church had an Xbox despite all the sinful games on there, to getting my cinematic film nerd pants wet with The Run. Remember Need for Speed The Run? The only run I recognize is the presidential run of James Earl Carter Jr. during the 48th quadrennial presidential election of 1976, to getting a secret sequel to Burnout Paradise with Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012. Shh, don't tell anyone. Except for EA, because I really want that remaster. Where is it? To not feeling ashamed for still liking Need for Speed with 2020's heat, to now confidently declaring that this is the current generation's best arcade racer with Need for Speed Unbound. It's easy to hyperbolize when there's barely any competition. Unbound whips onto the scene with Criterion Games returning to the franchise. And it's a much needed return. You want to know a secret? They made Burnout. Ghost Games had lots of trouble with the IP, but finally got Need for Speed back on track with the previous game Heat. And now Criterion reshapes that formula to create a unique experience based on the same working parts. Unbound's unique attributes are immediately apparent through its vivid world. Lakeshore is a dense Chicago-style city that perfectly fits Unbound's personality. It's a drab, gray metropolis that rains literally every other day. But the monochrome mood contrasts beautifully with Unbound's vibrant street art flourishes. The visuals complement Lakeshore's background story of expressive racers versus political tyranny, while keeping a grounded aesthetic instead of leaning into the obvious cartoony version of this dichotomy that many games fall back on. The soaked streets speak volumes thanks to the power of the Frostbite engine, where every race begins with detailed close-ups of water droplets desperately hanging on to car bumpers. Unbound is a looker both artistically and technologically. In other words, that's some good rain. Unbound doesn't stop impressing with its looks. It even has impeccable sound design. The default audio settings only play A$AP Rocky's curated soundtrack during races, which I thought was a strange choice because the diverse part hip-hop, part electronic soundtrack works great for the atmosphere in car culture. However, I quickly understood why when I began driving through the open world without it. Engines rip and roar like the Doomslayer through the streets of Lakeshore, especially when reverberating inside the thick tunnel walls. Engine sounds are even customizable to give each car a unique, tenacious tone of voice. Every sound makes a gritty impact that mixes wonderfully during races and especially during chases. Hearing radio chatter trying to speak through the carnage while the original score busts its way in with escalating hip-hop beats locks players inside an immersive iron grip. Saving the stellar soundtrack for the race events makes players savor it more while avoiding playlist fatigue. Need for Speed Unbound is definitely a looker and a sounder, but it isn't much of a story-er. Create a character, pick out their kicks, and then step into said kicks as an up-and-coming street racer, complete with car father figure Rydell and car best friend Yaz. The voice acting is a shocking delight coming from a series notorious for phoned-in performances like this.
It's over, Razor. It ain't over until I say it's over.
The characters bring strong chemistry to every cheesy line the script throws their way. Yaz and you are two car-crossed racers, building the next legendary tuner together by running some races until Yaz betrays you and steals the car. 2 years have passed, and now it's time to get your revenge and your car back from Yaz by mercilessly beating her. In races, of course. Lots and lots of racing. Foreshadowing. This is where the game properly opens up and introduces its most interesting aspect. Its structure. Because it's definitely not its story. Reusing transitions. I thought I was done complaining about the story, but I'm not. The writing is sort of fun in a Fast and Furious kind of way, and that's the best thing I can say about it. The rest of the writing is sappy and repetitive melodrama about family that could have worked if not beaten over the player's head constantly. Luckily, that's not what players come to a racing game for, so let's stop ruining the structure of this review and talk about structure. Need for Speed Heat's contrasting day and night system makes its return, as well as Heat's heat system. Day and night are still separate world states that only end when the player enters their garage and banks all their money. But unlike Heat, Unbound's day and night cycle is continuous throughout the week. Day leads into night and the heat system doesn't reset until the next morning. So racing too much during the day means beginning the night with a maxed out heat level. Cops patrol the streets and chase after racers based on their heat level. The higher the heat gained, the more aggressive the cops. It's basically the GTA Wanted system. The patrolling police bring everything to the table once the chase is on. High heat spawns police trucks that are more durable and specialize in off-road driving. High heat also attracts helicopters that always follow until line of sight is broken via tunnels or bridges. Each cop type has a way to outrun them, and the player is always on the edge of their seat trying to perform the right maneuvers to get back to the garage safely. Being chased by the cops isn't particularly challenging. I never got caught for my entire playthrough. Mainly because if you drive fast enough past a cop's vision cone, they won't notice you. I'd criticize this silliness more, but it works so well as a reward for going fast that I forgive it. I mean, the game is called Need for Speed. Whenever the cops did notice me, they still put up a good fight. Anytime my heat level was maxed out, I felt like I was inches away from being locked up. Riding that line between tough but not too tough is the fun kind of stress that very few games get right. It resulted in lots of enjoyable chases, but by the game's halfway point, I was getting tired of being spotted at the last possible second by another undercover cop I couldn't possibly see, and now spending 15 minutes on a chase I didn't want to do. High heat levels used to mean a higher XP multiplier. But Need for Speed Unbound ditches this leveling system entirely and instead ties progression solely around money. Now escaping high heat police pursuits gains extra money, and every street race completed raises the heat level regardless of time of day. In the previous game, heat rarely rose during the morning's legal street races, but was a massive problem during the illegal night races. In Unbound, every street race is an illegal one. So heat constantly rises throughout the day and carries into the night races. Every race provides a bit of risk alongside its cash prize, and any money earned during that time frame is always at risk of being taken away by the cops. It pushes players to be more strategic about the races they pick when trying to make the most money and still get to the garage in one piece. And just like real life, the richer you are, the less punishing it is. Money means everything in the world of Unbound. It is used for new cars, body parts, upgrades, garage enhancements, buying into races, clothes, rent, taxes, student loan debt. Unlike real life, it's a rewarding economy with plenty to purchase, so players rarely feel like they have more money than they need. Okay, maybe it's a little like real life. The game also enjoys taking the player's money, keeping things just difficult enough to stay engaging. Everything is designed around high risk, high reward. Each event allows betting between rival racers, which extracts more financial rewards for the player as long as they can actually beat their rival. I'd take this kind of virtual gambling over loot boxes any day. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Tying a name and a face to every car I race helped me get to know my enemies and personally connect with them, unlike most racing games. I quickly learned this guy named Lyric could kick my ass on straightaways, but couldn't drift to save his life. Meanwhile, some nobody named ASAP Rocky was the next Drift King. But if my car stayed at top speed, he wasn't much of a challenge. Learning how these racers drove made me study the racetracks organically so I could plan accordingly. It also makes those wins even more rewarding when I can rub it into an AI character's face who's been beating me for the past 3 tracks. Surely they won't hold a grudge over this during the robot AI revolution. Maybe I shouldn't say that on the internet. The rival mechanic is the closest Criterion can get to a nemesis system for racing games, without being sued by Warner Bros. Talk about a risk. When every event raises the heat level, then the stakes stay high. Returning to the garage still holding on to all that money increases in difficulty after every race. Night events tend to dish out higher jackpots than the day, but those higher jackpots come with higher levels of heat. Unlike Forza, Unbound doesn't come with a rewind feature. Mistakes can't be corrected with a simple click of the button. Players are only granted 4 restarts, and this doesn't reset until the next morning. Limiting restarts geniusly adds compounding risk to the entire day's events. I've unintentionally cornered myself many times by constantly restarting a daytime race, which left me no restarts for harder races at night. Sometimes losing is part of the progress, because those losses pave motivating stepping stones towards greater car upgrades that reap larger rewards. Since most races require a buy-in, it's easy to become cocky and take a chance on an extra race that fails catastrophically, making for one depressing ride back to the garage. Now the driving itself is top-notch arcade-style action. Metal Gear? Drifting around tight corners is intense and highly customizable, with a myriad of settings to personalize the player's drift style through button configurations and slipperiness sensitivity. Race cars can also be tuned for on-road or off-road performance to give them the proper edge based on the situation. This is carried over from previous entries, but because Unbound has such a strong propensity towards street racing, off-road tuning becomes unnecessary. There are no off-road specific races, and the open world gravitates more towards the bustling Chicago cityscape than the forested outer regions. Off-road tuning is best suited for pursuits and shortcuts, which are not substantial enough to warrant building that kind of race car. What is substantial for every whip is nitrous. It's a core pillar of any arcade racer, and Need for Speed Unbound stands strong with 2 kinds. Traditional NOS works just like any other racer with a single boost button that's used to reach max speed. NOS slowly replenishes over time, but can be accelerated through risky endeavors like driving past oncoming traffic. It's interesting enough, but Unbound truly shines with its second nitrous that's tailored towards a quick burst of acceleration. This nitrous fills much quicker with 3 intensity levels, but also has a very limited time to be used before depleting back to 0. This kind of stylish nitrous doesn't fill up over time. It instead requires specific actions like drifting or slipstreaming to build up. Once the first intensity level has passed, the player can quickly tap the boost button for a light burst of acceleration. Or they can wait to gain more rewarding intensity levels that risk depleting the gauge back to 0 if they take too long. Even using nitrous turns into a risk-reward experience. Style boosting like this is vital during drifts to immediately build back the speed lost by driving sideways. It puts players into a pulse-pounding rhythm of high-speed drifting into boost back into drift that never gets old. Despite how good it can feel, steering can also feel choppy depending on the situation, and the drive model is not as refined as some of its competitors. Cough in Forza. However, where it lacks in driving physics, it makes up for in style. Customization is the liberating component of Need for Speed that makes me want to drive in these cars over any other racing game. Ever since the Need for Speed reboot in 2015, the franchise took pride in its car customization, and Unbound takes it another step forward thanks to its art direction. Not only can cars be transformed with extravagant body parts and paint jobs, but now there are animated flourishes outlining every car to make them pop. These stylish highlights add personality to the cars and the game as a whole that hasn't been seen in any racing game before. Coming from a genre that usually plays it safe and stagnant, Unbound's visual design is a breath of fresh air. Being behind the wheel of a souped-up Testarossa personally made by you makes every race more than a competition. It's an exercise in self-expression. For real-world car lovers, a car isn't a tool used to get from point A to point B. It's a project, a personal project they tinker away at. meticulously crafting and tweaking the stock car they fell in love with into the car of their dreams. Any racing game without deep layers of car customization misses an aspect of car culture that ignites every enthusiast across the globe. Without that, you are simply a lesser racing game. Unless you're Burnout. That being said, I want to say that Unbound's decal customization, it could use some work. Key features like cropping single images or pitch and yaw are missing here, causing some unnecessary headaches when creating the perfect look. Building the dream car is essential in Need for Speed Unbound because this is the main goal at the end of every week. The game takes cues from Dead Rising, Majora's Mask, and Disco Elysium by implementing the passage of time within the mechanics. The player has only 1 week to upgrade their car to the proper skill class while earning enough cash to buy into the Grand Prix. This final challenge is a series of races that the player must win consecutively to earn the grand prize. It isn't much more of a challenge than the regular races throughout the week, but having that carrot at the end of the weekly stick gives players a clear goal to plan for. From what they can buy to how many races they can fit in before the weekends, a proper plan is important to prepare for the Grand Prix. However, days are not time sensitive. Time only moves forward when the player returns to the garage. This means players can race as many times as they like before progressing the week forward, making the whole system pretty generous. The week tells a compelling rags to riches narrative, with the first few days inside a stock car racking up more participation prizes than gold medals. Money slowly builds day by day,
which leads to new car upgrades that help players win more and buy into larger cash prize races.
The further the week goes, the more compelling it becomes, with certain days adding special races that award new supercars and gargantuan jackpots. Even though heat levels reset at the beginning of each day, some days ratchet up the tension by starting the player at heat level 1. To discourage passivity, special nighttime races appear that require at least a heat level of 3 to enter. The week is constantly spicing itself up to successfully create a more dramatic experience beyond the racing. Unbound is an emotional game, dishing out enough lows so players always appreciate the highs. The game design wants to push players towards the most compelling way to play, and while it may not be as punishing as it could have, it's still constantly exciting. Being able to lose and have to continue forward is the beauty of dynamic racing games like this. Just like any other sports game, losing is progression. Wait, I'm now realizing they got this system from literally every sports game with a season mode. I guess it's not that special. What is special is crossing the finish line at the Grand Prix with your maxed out personalized Uber car, oozing with the exaggerated swagger of anybody. Anybody could be behind the wheel of that. What a dramatic and well-paced arc. Until you realize you got to do it 3 more times. You see, what I did is I tricked you. That Grand Prix at the end of the week was just a qualifier. You see, the true grand finale is at the end of week 4 and is titled The Grand, because they are just as creative as I am. It requires 4 cars, each from a separate skill class to complete. This structure encourages players to stretch their sea legs and use multiple cars throughout the campaign, instead of buying the one they want as early as possible and sticking to it until credits roll. Week 1 was about building the superior A-class car. Now the player goes through a new week for each class of car, from A through S+. Wait, that doesn't sound right. There's no S+ in the alphabet. Is that 19 weeks of racing? Holy shit.
Tyler.
Yes, Sue? What is it?
Look back about 3 sentences ago in the script.
Oh yeah, I did say 4 weeks. So what are the classes?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Tyler. It's a complex gaming language popularized from the Devil May Cry series, as well as much older titles I'm too lazy to look up right now, that use a similar school grading system from F through A that goes beyond A for higher grades and use the letter S.
Oh, so the plus sign at the end of the S is used to tell players that it's superior to the S.
That's correct.
And it's 4 weeks because just like school, there's an A+ as well.
Now you're getting it. The game's class system even goes as low as B class.
Wow, interesting. So there must be a B+, right?
No.
Oh. Why not?
Because that would make too much sense.
Oh, of course.
Don't ever ask that question again.
So this weekly gameplay loop is repeated 4 times with increasingly faster cars, and the game's pacing breaks down because of it. This is largely because each week is a carbon copy of the last, but at a slightly faster speed. It quickly becomes repetitive and is a mental drag. Winning your starting car back at the Grand is supposed to be a triumphant reunion, but it doesn't work 4 weeks in when I'm exhausted. And the personal touches I made to the car in the beginning are gone at the end because what I did went against the story's tutorial. What works better is seeing the escalating sense of speed from class to class pay off by the final week. Racing with an S-Plus supercar recaptures the high-velocity thrills of the previous game, putting players at the brink of control with rapid races that could completely crumble after one wrong move. Week 4 houses the intense and risky Need for Speed signature races that had me falling in love with the series. But it takes too long to get there, and is disproportionately paced compared to the rest of the weeks. Simply cutting down the campaign to a 3-week structure would have gone a long way. What further adds to this game feeling long in the tooth is that there aren't enough new tracks regularly introduced each week to excite players. Need for Speed Unbound's weak track variety trapped inside its weekly gameplay loop slowly shows that its handful of event types can't be stretched out to a 30-hour game. Not only are there races to complete, but also drift events, time trials, and takeover events. Drift events are won by drifting. That's it. You drift. You get points. You beat other people. It's really simple. They are simple enough drifting activities that serve as a needed distraction from races. Takeover events are unique to Unbound and play out like American Ninja Warrior, but for cars. A special track is littered with items to smash through, which rack up points alongside boosting, hang time, and drifting. The rhythmic dance of comboing boosts into corner drifts while smashing through a line of boxes is nirvanic, and is the perfect deviation from races. It's so good that it ruins the drift events, because takeover events are just like them but better. Their striking similarities make for another example of repetitive gameplay. Time trials utilize specialized sports cars that become purchasable after completion, but the events are unlocked one at a time every other in-game day, and there aren't enough of them. One unique night event has players delivering a hot car safely to its destination while the cops are barreling behind their back. It's an exhilarating chase, but when the player is avoiding cops as constantly as they are in the open world, chases get tiring over time, and it's hard to want to opt into any more of them. Unbound lacks the variety that Heat had with their own off-road tracks and sanctioned races, but it's the way the open world racer is structurally designed that makes it the more engaging Need for Speed game. Structure. There, I talked about it. Can I go home now? Oh. Playing Need for Speed in 2023 is like finding out Evanescence still makes music and is opening for Muse, who also still makes music. I'm quite surprised this ancient franchise is still alive and kicking after all this. It continues to bring out the arcade-style oldies with a fresh coat of paint in front of a world that has allowed the dust to settle on its genre for far too long. Need for Speed Unbound has the personality that elevates it above today's contenders, in spite of some formulaic open-world racer design with uninspired collectibles that hasn't budged since 2008. A well-crafted day and night gameplay loop nudges the game past any of its usual trappings. If Need for Speed can keep climbing towards this stylish direction, then I'll keep coming back for more. Is all this praise still analogous to Evanescence circa 2023? I don't know, I didn't go see him. Yet. I know.